Here we have a Kodak Retina II camera, type 014. You can spot that immediately because it has the film reminder dial underneath the rewind knob, which distinguishes it from a type 011, or the main distinguishing feature from the outside. So this camera is a bit tired looking. A lot of visible corrosion here on the struts for the front standard there. A few lumps and bumps, some serious ice bumps at the back. The shutter does function, but the shutter release sticks down, so that's certainly a problem and something that needs to be dealt with. The focus is very dry feeling. The rangefinder doesn't move, it's in the fully forward position and is jammed there. So I'm going to strip this down now and service it. So hopefully everything will go smoothly, and if not, well, that'll make it more interesting. So first I'll remove the rewind knob. Then we'll move to seeing if we can fight off the advance knob. I'll take that collar off the top of the rewind shaft. So the advance knob, we need a spanner on here to stop the shaft from turning. So I'd better find that. Zoom you out a bit so you can fit in here. So I've got this spanner that's been ground up to fit the flats on the top of the take-up spool. And this we're turning clockwise, opposite the direction of the arrow. And of course it doesn't want to move. So we've got to break this thing free. They're quite often frozen in place. I've got a good technique for getting them loose. The knob is chrome brass. It's reasonably easy to scar that up and make a mess of it, so I'd suggest you don't resort to using pliers on it. Using a hose clamp normally does the job. Here I have a hose clamp, nothing fancy there. I've got a piece of leather sitting loosely in the middle of it at the moment. That's to provide some padding between the knob and the hose clamp so I don't scar up the leather, the chrome rather. So I'll position that over the top. Do the hose clamp up nice and tight. Want something else to tighten that up with. Okay, so holding the spanner here on the flat on the shaft to stop that from turning, I'll have a go at moving this, and of course it doesn't want to move. So a pair of pliers. These ones will do because they were handy. Let's see if this will move. Doesn't want to. Alright. A little bit of brute force then. Right, we're away. It's loose. And spin that off my fingers. Now to remove the top cover. 2 screws, one at each end. Just open the front of the camera back up. We have to get the knob off the top of the shutter release. A pair of crimp lug pliers like these will do the jobs, ones with nicely rounded jaws. Don't crush that piece. That will be chromed brass. It's very thin in cross section and very easily damaged. That's stage 1, right, so now cock the shutter. I'm rolling the sprocket shaft with my thumb until it locks. And that will allow me to depress the shutter release as far as I can, holding that down with the tip of a screwdriver, and wriggle the cover up over that, back over the advanced rewind lever at the back here. That's our top cover off. This camera is chock-a-block with sand. It's obviously been to the beach on more than one occasion. There's a bit of corrosion visible here, a bit of fluff and debris. Right, onwards and upwards. So, I want the rangefinder off. Screws are tight. I'll have the rewind off. We'll take the rewind apart, take the bush off it. There's a single screw here holds these components together. I can find my screwdriver. This may do. It's an unusual screw that with a reduced end. You'd make sure you don't lose it. Let's take those components, pop them aside for the cleaner. And under here, I'm going to release that spring and remove it from the post. Take that screw out, the pivot for the frame counter setting wheel, and take that black shield off there. If I hold back this lever, I should be able to lift out the shutter release shaft. Take out this pivot screw for the little idler gear and cam. Take out this screw, which holds the components which meter how much film runs through the camera and when you're advancing the film, and the washers. There's a stack of washers there. I'm going to take out this screw that holds the spring on at the front. Now I want to remove this collar, and it may or may not put up a fight. Since everything else looks a bit corroded, it will probably put up a fight. It's left hand threaded, of course. Let's see if I can get that to come loose. Yes. It's the advanced rewind lever. That's the gear that off the top of the advanced, that one's a ratchet which stops the film from rolling backwards unless you've set the advanced rewind lever back to the rewind position. The other one is where the advance mechanism is locked when you're advancing the film once sufficient film has moved through the camera. And lift out our advance shaft. It's a bit dry and gritty. The take-up spool is complete. That's a bonus. That's pretty much the top of the camera stripped down at that point. Turn my attention to the base of the camera, and at the base of the camera I need to lift the leather off. It'll only come back this far. This will be riveted on, I think. There's a few lumps and bumps under here. Whether the screws have lifted or whether they've just bit of corrosion under there. So that's in keeping with the general pattern of corrosion elsewhere. So I've got to have the leather lifted back to this point to get to that screw holding the struts in the body. It's worth taking the leather right back to about this point, because you end up with a line. Where you glue it down, you'll end up with a line across there, a visible line. And if you can push it down to somewhere around here, it'll become invisible. If it's a straight line across the middle of the base plate, it won't be invisible. So I lift the leather down as far as I can, which is at this point here, because this is riveted on. Then we're away laughing. You can see the corrosion in here. That white stuff is the corrosion products on the aluminium body. All of that will need to be cleaned away. The 3 screws holding the tripod socket, that one is very damaged. The head's broken. The socket looks a little bit distorted there. It is distorted. It means that someone has either ridiculously over tightened the tripod at some stage and popped that, or some other unfortunate thing has happened. Perhaps sometimes people put a camera on the tripod and the whole arrangement is unstable, and the wind will knock it over and it all hits the ground and everything. It's all bad after that. This screw head is only half present. The tripod socket's broken. I'll need to I should be able to find a tripod socket for that. If I'd been unable to find a tripod socket, I would have pushed that back into shape. You can see it's cracked through here. I would have pushed that back into shape and probably put it back in place on the camera with some epoxy, and just told the owner to be very, very careful about using it. Alright, A little spacer washer just fell out here. I recognise that. That will be off the shutter release shaft, and it's lucky that that's turned up now because it's no fun when you lose them. They're not always present. They give a little bit of extra push on the shaft to release the shutter when you press the shutter. If that had been lost, I would have had to spend a long time trying to adjust the point at which the shutter released and the film advance was released to allow you to wind on for the next shot. So I want to get the door off the front. We have a single screw top and bottom that form the pivots. That was a bit corroded looking, but it wasn't tight. The same with its mate at the bottom of the camera. And there may or may not be a little washer either at the top or the bottom of the door, or both. There's one at the top, just to take up space so that the door doesn't rattle in the body. Now I'm going to lift this off. I'm going to pull upwards to pull it over the top of that piece there, off the slots. There's two paper washers and they're present and correct, and I'll put that door aside. Now it's starting to look a bit more stripped down. That lens looks particularly ugly. Hopefully that will clean up well. I need to remove the lens and shutter assembly. So I'll get the tool in place. Yes, it did turn. It's stiff. I might put a drop of solvent down there. That's very stiff, and I don't want to damage that retainer ring if I can avoid it. I'll just put a drop of naphtha down there. And here we're using it as a thin lubricant, you could say. It's certainly very stiff. The entire shutter's moving there. Now that must be not seated correctly on that pin at the back which locks it in position. I'll have to be very careful about getting this off. Try again with my spanner. It is turning. You can hear that. That must be off by now. Yes, I can lift my shutter away. And the locator pin, which stops that shutter from turning in the mount, is missing. It'll just be a little screw that was in the mount and it would have locked into a position here. It's not present. That tells me that that's why that retainer ring was done up so tight. It's because someone had done it up ridiculously tight to stop the shutter from moving in the body. Right, so we got that part done. The shutter's out. Pop that to one side for future service. And start work here. So first I want to take this ring off the front. This ring at the front couples to the rangefinder. There's an arm on this ring here which couples to a screw post here, and that screw post at the top pulls the rangefinder forwards as you move the focus away from the infinity position. Right, so that's all exposed now. I need to mark the positions here so that I have alignment marks for reassembly, so I can put the shutter back, put the focus back in the correct position. Everything's going remarkably invisible in the toolbox today. However, we have our methods. So there's two things I want to do. I'll zoom you in a bit. I'll just do another section for this. I'm going to scribe a line from the outer helical, which is the shiny brass part here, to the focus scale ring. So I've put two scribe marks across there at the bottom, and I'll put one across from them at the top. And that's our first stage, because I've got more marking I need to do, because I need to mark the position of the outer helical and the inner helical so that they get correctly assembled, reassembled once I'm putting the camera back together. And normally I do that. Remove these screws, take that off. So normally I adjust the outer helical here until the inner helical and outer helical are dead flush, and if they won't go all the way back to dead flush, then that will do. So I'll just see if that'll turn back a little bit further. And what I'm looking for is to get the front surfaces level. And then once I've got the front surfaces level, I can extend my scribe marks across that point, because we have two scribe marks at the bottom part and one at the top on the outer helical that we put there earlier. That should be good. I'll just take the tension off that. 6 screws hold the retaining ring in place, and they are very reluctant to come out. It always helps when you've got the right size screwdriver. Those screws are very tight. I can see corrosion on them, so I would assume that corrosion is helping them stick in place. Now commonly when I'm servicing one of this model, I don't put all the components through the ultrasonic cleaner. Usually I just clean all the components by hand. In this case, since it's pretty, because of the level of corrosion around the place, I think I will put the parts through the cleaner. So I have 4 screws that hold the bellows to the back of the front standard, small black screws, and they are unscrewing nicely for me, which is good. They don't always do that, particularly if there's corrosion in the camera, because they're screwed into a steel plate. They are often corroded in. We have 4 screws hold the focus mount into the back of the front standard. Now I'm just loosening those now. Pull the struts back open. I can lift out the focus mount. This part gets cleaned by hand because it has a felt light trap at the back here, and it's also painted, and that paint will just come off in the ultrasonic cleaner if I was to try and do anything rash like put that through the cleaner. So now I need to get the struts out. There's 1 screw at the top here, two screws in the film cassette chamber, and they're very tight, which of course is not at all unexpected. I'll just give them a little tap to encourage them to come out. Number 1. Number 2. So all I did to get them loose was apply some tension on them with a screwdriver and tap it on the top of the head. A couple of sharp taps, and that was all that was required to encourage those screws to rotate. We have 1 screw at the base of the camera. Commonly they're hard to get out. They've had adhesive on them, of course, because the leather's been glued down there, and in this case there's a bit of corrosion down there too. So I'll do the same again. That's it. And the bellows struts should lift out of the body. You have to lift them off the shaft there, lift that spring out so we don't lose it. There should be 2 spacer washers in here. One of those looked thinner than the other. Perhaps it's an illusion. Alright, so there's the body stripped down. Now, given the level of corrosion in this one, I suspect that the bellows may be loose on the body, and I'm going to check that closely. There's sand and corrosion products and other stuff down the back there, which all has to be cleaned out. Up here, the sprocket shaft can usually be left in these cameras. In this case I'm going to remove it because of the level of corrosion around the place. So there's a little grub screw top and bottom. And there's a washer. There's a spacer washer at the top. That's enough. We can lift that shaft out. And on this camera, since the exhaust bumps are pretty bad, I'm just going to investigate whether that leather's going to come up for me. The last Retina 2 I wanted to do this on, the leather was not going to come up. Yeah, I think it will. So I'm going to strip the leather off here. That's always a challenge of its own.